Alright, so this is our quick review over ecology. We're going to go through some videos. Make sure you also check the PowerPoints that are going to be online and all your notes that you have. But this is a quick review over all the units. So I'm going to make a few videos so that you can have something to review with, as well as your notes and again all the PowerPoints that are online. Okay. So ecology, we talked about ecology and we said is the study of the relationship between organisms and their environment. Okay, so anything or however these organisms interact with each other and how they interact with the environment, that's what we call ecology. That's the study of these relationships. Okay, and we talked about specific relationships, which we'll review as well over all these living organisms. We talk about abiotic and biotic. Abiotic being non-living things, like this piece of wood right here. Okay, and biotic being the trees and the flowers that we see in our picture. Okay, all right. So let's move on. We talked about factors that impact the ecosystem and how it actually impacts the survival of this of the species that live there, and we call these limiting factors. And the limiting factors are just factors that constrain, okay, the growth of these populations, or that do not allow populations to grow to their max or to the capacity that they're able to. Okay, and we call that. Remember, we talked about climax communities and the carrying capacity of different environments. Okay, but these are limiting factors. These are the things that affect the survival of the species. Okay, now we said there was two types of limiting factors. We said one was called density dependent factors, and these factors depend on the population size. Okay, and we said dependent factors or density dependent are things like food, water, living space, predation, competition, and that's because all those things depend on how many of the how much or how many organisms are in that specific place. Okay, how many organisms? Like this eagle, there's three rats or mice down there. So if she catches one, then she still has another two. But what if there was 5 eagles in that place? Well, the food would be the limiting factor because there's only a certain amount of mice there. The other kind that we talked about is density independent factors. These things are going to happen regardless of the size of the population. Like the fire that you see in the picture. If there's one deer in the forest and there's 200 deer in the forest, that fire is still going to happen. It's not going to depend on that. Okay. The other thing that we talked about, and I think I already mentioned it, is the carrying capacity. Okay. Now, carrying capacity is reached when that place or that environment gets to the point where it can not longer support more organisms living in the area. Okay, and you can see it here in the example on the slide. On the area that's labeled A, we can actually see that there is 3 more tree trunks that are open, so the population can still grow. Okay, on the section B, well, all the tree trunks are taken up, so that means that environment is at its carrying capacity, cannot carry any more organisms, and more than likely, probably these little birds that are here are going to eventually either die or migrate out of that environment because this place or this area is not going to be able to provide enough for them to survive, like food, water, or space for them to live. Okay, so that's carrying capacity. Okay, so again, ecology is the relationship between all these things, and the relationship between living things and the environment, or abiotic and biotic things and organisms. Okay, organisms are living, of course. Okay, now these relationships we talked about, okay, are symbiosis, or symbiosis are just ecological interactions between these two organisms, two living things. Okay, and we talked about a few. We made a few skits and we watched a few videos over them. And one of them was commensalism. Commensalism is just a relationship where one organism benefits and the other organism neither benefits or is harmed. So nothing happens to the other one. Okay? And that's commensalism. Like the example in the picture, the horse and the birds. The horse is really not Losing anything is not gaining anything. We're gonna focus on the picture here. We're gonna focus on the birds on the grass. Okay, the horse is gonna walk regardless of the birds being there or not. But every time he walks, he moves the grass, and this all these little insects jump up and down, and the birds grab those insects and they benefit, right? So again, this is where one organism benefits, in this case the bird, and the other one is neither benefits or gets hurt, which is the horse. Okay. The other type that we talked about is mutualism. Mutualism is just where both organisms benefit. In this picture, you see that the flower is providing nectar for the bee, so the bee's happy for that, and the bee is picking up the nectar in his butt, not the nectar, the pollen in his butt, so he can take it to another flower and actually pollinate the flower. Okay. That's a plus plus. This one is an example of a plus plus in our body systems, which is our digestive system. There's bacteria in our gut that helps us digest. Okay, they get nutrients. We're able to digest our food. Okay, another one, parasitism. Parasitism is just a relationship where one organism benefits and the other is harm. And in parasitism is a plus minus situation. One is always going to get something out of it. The other one's always going to be losing something. Okay, that's another example. The tick and the dog. And again, these are just parasitic relationships. The other one we talked about is predation. Predation is just when one organism preys on the other. Okay, and we talked about these actually being interactions, right? We said there's three relationships, which are commensalism, mutualism, and parasitism, and then we said we had two interactions, which are predation, where one organism preys on the other, and the other one we said was competition. This is the struggle between two species for the same resource, okay? And those are examples of competition, okay? So again, those are the interactions that we talked about. That's symbiotic relationships. After that, we talked about food chains and food webs, and how the energy in these ecosystems, or in any ecosystem or environment, actually flows all the way to the top predators. Okay, and we label different things, and we different levels or trophic levels in food chains, food webs, and food pyramids. Okay, now if you remember, we'll look at this example, and we said that heterotrophs are consumers. Okay, we said autotrophs make their own food, like plants and other types of autotrophs, like protists, or in this case, in the picture, the flower. Okay, those are autotrophs. They make their own food. Okay, through a process called photosynthesis, which we already talked about in detail. But those that cannot produce their own food are called heterotrophs, and they're consumers. Okay, some of them are called herbivores, which are the primary consumers. Omnivores, which are secondary usually. They can also be primary. Omnivores eat both plants and animals. Herbivores only plants, or autotrophs. Okay, and then carnivores, like the snake here, right, or tertiary consumers. And then we also got our decomposers and detritivores. But decomposers, we said, are fungus, and they decompose everything. Bacteria as well, they decompose everything, and they're still consumers. Okay, all right. So again, we looked at food chains, we looked at food webs. Now this one up here, I'll go back to this slide. This is a food chain because it's a linear representation of how the energy actually flows through the ecosystem. Okay, if we were to give percentages to this pictures here, this would provide 100% of the energy. Once it goes to the rabbit, okay, only 10% goes to the rabbit. The other 90% goes out to the ecosystem through heat, reproduction, and metabolism. Remember that, right? So 100% here, 10% here, and only 1% of the original energy would end up with the fox, right? Because every step we're losing energy. So this one only had 100 kilocalories, then the rabbit would actually get 10 kilocalories, and then the fox will get 1 kilocalorie, right? Because we're losing 90% of the energy every time through heat, metabolism, and reproduction. Remember that, okay? And then we also talked about food webs, and food webs are, we said, are just two or more food chains connected or interconnected, right? So you follow any specific food chain here, or any path here, and you create a food web. So if we're looking at grasses and then we'll go butterfly, then to the grooves, and then from there we'll go to the hawk. You can see that that actually forms a food chain, right? But if we connect all these food chains that are here, then that creates a food web. Two or more food chains put together or connected, okay? Remember that the arrows on the food chain or a food web represent the direction of the energy flow. So if we look at the, let's look at the berries here, okay? And we see that the arrow is pointing to the deer. That means that the energy from the berries is going to the deer. If you're creating a food web or a food chain and you don't use arrows, you use a line, then that's just a list of organisms. That's not a food web, that's not a food chain. Okay? Alright, let's keep going. This one, quick question. Is this a food web or is this a food chain? I hope you said food chain because there's only one direction that the energy is flowing and is linear. Plant to grasshopper, grasshopper to bird, then to the snake, then to the owl. And we gotta use arrows. That's a food chain, okay? Second thing, food chain or food web. All these are food chains. There's 3 food chains here, right? But they're not connected. Now we could easily make it a food web if we wanted to, because we could go like that, so that those 2 are connected, right? We could even go here, right? Or we can come here, and then we can go here, and we could even go the corn to the grasshopper, and that connects everything. So that's a food web now. If we take those red arrows out, then we have a food chain. Okay. Again, you got to be able to differentiate between these two. Okay, between food webs and food chains. This is a food web, as you can see, they're all connected. Okay. And don't forget that we also need to be able to identify food webs and understand the differences between the levels, right? We have primary consumers, secondary consumers. The higher you go on the food web, if you have a food web, the higher you go on the food web, the less energy there is, okay? The most energy in the food web is always going to be at the bottom. The least energy is going to be on the top. Energy decreases as you go up. The only thing that increases, remember, the only thing that increases as you go up is pollution, okay? Pollution, and that's called biomagnification, okay? We talked about that in class, and all they're saying is that the higher you go, the more concentrated the pollution is going to be, so there's going to be more pollutants at the top of this food web. This is a quick review, okay? I hope it helped you. Make sure you review and use other sources to review ecology, okay? And I'll make another quick video to finish up succession.